In this edition of One American News Investigates, we follow the money. Vice President Joe Biden bribes a Ukrainian president with U.S. tax dollars to protect his son Hunter. A prosecutor general gets fired. Money changes hands. And Biden feigns innocence. In part one, we showed you phone recordings between Joe Biden and President Poroshenko. In part two, we show why Ukraine's president was so eager to accept Biden's terms and demands. Despite the evidence of Biden's corruption, despite the money trail, despite the recordings, corporate media and the Democrat machine believe if they continue to ignore the evidence, the American voter will ignore it too, all the way to the ballot box. This is a continuation of OAN's exclusive series investigating Biden corruption in Ukraine, a story where truth in Biden's world is truly darker than fiction. Everyone denies wrongdoing. Joe Biden says he didn't bribe Ukraine with $1 billion to remove a pesky prosecutor general.
I'm a man of my word. And that now that the new prosecutor general's in place, we're ready to move forward in signing that new $1 billion loan guarantee.
Biden's friend, former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, says he wasn't pressured by Biden to force the prosecutor general to resign.
He promised me to give me the statement on resignation. And 1 hour ago, he bring me the written statement of his resignation.
Great.
And this is my second step for keeping my promises.
I agree.
Joe Biden's son Hunter, who was being paid over $80,000 a month to merely exist on the board of Burisma Holdings, Ukraine's largest natural gas company, claims his father knew nothing whatsoever about his dealings in Ukraine.
Did you and your father ever discuss Ukraine?
No.
Hunter was only involved in one of the most scandal-drenched companies in Ukraine. Joe Biden was the Ukraine point man, involved down to the minute details of discussing who would occupy what roles in the prosecutor general's office. And still, he claims he never discussed Ukraine with his son Hunter. Rudy Giuliani, attorney to the president, renowned for dismantling crime families in New York, says Biden's ignorance here is an act.
Same question here with the Bidens. He becomes a senator. Right away, the brother gets a sweetheart loan. Joe says, I don't know about my family's business. Then there's another deal and another deal. Joe's answer is always the same. I don't know about my family's business. There comes a time when you have to know about your family's business. Otherwise, it's proof that you're actually involved in it. It's very, very sad. It's very sad for him. It's very sad for his family. But it's a tragedy for the United States that a lot of our media is deliberately covering up a very, very, very substantial crime.
With over 10 hours of recordings of both official and private conversations between Joe Biden and President Poroshenko, it is painfully clear the actors in the Biden-Ukraine drama are lying. Hundreds of millions were made on both sides, stashed away perhaps into the likes of offshore accounts like the Bank of N.T. Butterfield & Son in Hamilton, Bermuda, and other tax-free havens. All the while, Biden, Poroshenko, and the Democrat Party machine insist Ukrainian Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin was a corrupt man who had to go. But as we demonstrated in part one of this series, not only was Shokin doing his job and cracking down on Biden-tied corruption, but Poroshenko admits to Joe Biden Prosecutor General Shokin actually did nothing wrong. It's worth listening to again.
Joe, I have a second positive news for you. Yesterday, I meet with the General Prosecutor Shokin.
Yes.
And despite of the fact that we didn't have any corruption charges, we don't have any information about he doing something wrong, I especially asked him, no, it was the day before yesterday, I especially asked him to resign.
In the hours of recordings between these two men, It is clear Poroshenko was all but backflipping for Joe Biden's every request. But today, Poroshenko and Biden seem to pretend these conversations never happened. Corporate media dismiss these recordings too, and Poroshenko plays right along.
You spoke with Vice President Biden many, many times over the course of the period when you were president, he was vice president. He pressed you on many issues. Did he ever bring up the topic of Burisma, the company that employed his son as one of its board of directors?
So my absolutely clear answer, no, never.
Lies come easy when there's so much to lose, or when there's a lot to hide. So who's hiding what? Joe Biden hides how he interfered in the governance of a foreign country to protect his own son from investigation. Poroshenko hides how he followed Biden's illegal demands. But why was Poroshenko so eager to please Joe Biden's every whim? To break the law and fire a prosecutor general he himself admitted did nothing wrong? The story is, Ukraine desperately needed the loan guarantees Biden was dangling. Indeed, the year Hunter Biden was appointed to the board of Burisma, Ukraine suffered a devastating betrayal. Former President Viktor Yanukovych had run off to Moscow, taking with him Ukraine's entire treasury, or nearly all of it. Ukrainians woke up the next morning to discover Ukraine was left with $8,000. So when millionaire chocolate magnate Petro Poroshenko ran for office and won that same year in 2014, things were looking up. Giuliani recalls the optimism over Poroshenko's victory.
Poroshenko was the great hope. I remember that because I have great interest in Ukraine. And I remember being told that by Senator McCain. I remember being told that by other members of my party. I remember being told that by Democrats and Ukrainian American friends that I have. Poroshenko is wonderful. He's a rich man. He's not going to be corrupt. And we can trust him.
6 years later, Poroshenko is no longer president. And by July 2020, Poroshenko is implicated in 24 criminal probes. Let's go back to the money Joe Biden was offering Poroshenko, the $1 billion in U.S. tax dollars to help Ukraine in aid. Did Poroshenko do Biden's bidding, fire Viktor Shokin, ease off Hunter Biden and Burisma out of pure patriotism to help his country? Or was it greed? Poroshenko, by conservative estimates, is worth over $700 million. But extravagant wealth does not necessarily negate greed.
When I went back to Ukraine 2 years later, and I asked two people they know, why is he so corrupt? And that would be Viktor Pinchuk and Vitaly Klitschko. They said because he was a millionaire, he wanted to be a billionaire. And he wanted to be the biggest oligarch. He was jealous of Kolomoisky and Pinchuk, and he wanted to be like them. And they told me in very simple terms, there's nothing in this country that happens where he doesn't take a piece of it. And I said, it reminds me of The Godfather. There's a scene in The Godfather where the guy who controls this little mafia thing says to the young Godfather, you know, every time you steal money or take money, I have to wet my beak. I have to wet my beak. And they said, yeah, it's like that. He wets his beak, everything. Anything goes on here, Poroshenko gets a piece of it.
Given this vantage, was it patriotic duty driving Poroshenko to play Joe Biden's lapdog? Or was it Poroshenko with dollar signs in his eyes, with dreams of fattening his many enterprises and his offshore tax-free bank accounts? We'll be right back. When it comes to the Biden bribe tapes, there's no mistaking. Poroshenko does everything he can to please Biden to get his $1 billion in U.S. loan guarantees, which eventually he does get. But before diving into the next round of recordings, we need first to discern motivations. Andrei Derkach, member of Ukraine Parliament, who, through his extensive investigations, has long accused Joe Biden of illegal foreign interference, tells OAN then Vice President Biden exploited Ukraine through Poroshenko. Biden found Poroshenko's weak spot, Biden saw his pathological greed and used it. So in exchange for the $1 billion, Poroshenko sold the sovereignty of Ukraine. The Biden team basically assigned which people would go to which supervisory boards of state-owned companies. Money flowed from there. Before becoming president, Poroshenko made his millions as a chocolate magnate, expanding his money wellsprings across dozens of entities, from candy to cars to sugar to shipyards. He's a very greedy man, and when he became president, his greed was the biggest problem. At a certain point, Poroshenko decided the whole country was his own corporation. So he would be the one helping Biden with Burisma and establishing all these supervisory boards so he could saber rattle and earn money on Russia during the war. Biden at the same time would allow him to do that. Poroshenko could steal as much as he wanted. But unlike Russian oligarchs, Poroshenko's enterprises are more like brotherhoods. Once Poroshenko became president, he appointed his closest allies to powerful positions in the government. Also, unlike Russian oligarchs, rather than tapping into public funds, Poroshenko's dozens of enterprises, along with those of his trusted partners, were conveniently awarded state contracts, billions of dollars in aid funneled to a select few. Indeed, Poroshenko was personally invested in seeing Biden's $1 billion bribe go through. Derkach cites as evidence Poroshenko's own ally and vice prime minister, Ivana Klimpush-Syntsadze. She herself claimed and acknowledged that most of the $1 billion from Biden was dispersed through the big companies like Lenin Smithy, Bogdan, Ukroboronprom, which are all related to Poroshenko. As vice prime minister, she gave the breakdown of where Biden's bribe went. This was open information, openly stated to the press. A cursory attempt to understand Poroshenko's empire is a complicated endeavor, but one thing is certain. OAN has spoken to nearly a dozen Ukrainian sources on record and off, official and unofficial. They all say, one way or another, Poroshenko's companies profited off Biden's billion-dollar taxpayer bribe and off the backs of Ukrainians. Andrei Teleshenko, former diplomat and Ukrainian political consultant, says, as a result, Poroshenko and his brotherhood of oligarchs are being protected by a vast and financially interested apparatus.
Well, yes, they are. It's even right now, the prosecutor general was trying not to investigate Poroshenko because of the foreign advisement from abroad. Even the State Department today and other countries are advised not to investigate Poroshenko because Ukraine is going to be in trouble, whoever does that. That's what's going on right now. I heard it personally from other officials, from other embassy officials, not to touch Poroshenko. You can touch anybody you want around him, put anybody you want around him.
And what would be the?
Because he has a lot of. They told us because he has a lot of foreign contacts, and you're going to be in a lot of trouble if you do that. That's what I was told personally.
Since Poroshenko lost his re-election effort and became a member of parliament, his nearly every defense has been he is being persecuted by his political enemies, and it's all fueled by big, bad Russia and that villain, Vladimir Putin. That's Poroshenko's public alibi. Here's a recording procured from Ukrainian Secret Service of then-President Poroshenko and President Putin in the spring of 2015, amid what was supposed to be a tense time between Russia and Ukraine.
Мы с вами люди трудящиеся, может и к солидарности придем. Называется у нас год официально теперь праздник весны и труда. Вот так вот. Как у вас внутри-то, вы справляетесь там со всей ситуацией? Да, справляюсь, чего там. Чем дальше, тем легче, совсем непросто. Но я вам могу сказать, что желающих длинной очереди на должность украинского президента не наблюдаем. Зря вы так думаете. Да. Украина — это интересная, красивая страна. Нет, так я горжусь тем. По крайней мере, я горжусь тем, что у меня рейтинг поддержки и доверия не падает. Так что, слава богу, это очень важно, чтобы люди доверяли, самое главное. Это ключевое. Хорошо, Владимир Владимирович. Жму руку. Спасибо большое.
Mortal enemies, these two. A mere snapshot. Hop over to Team Biden in the throes of a basement-based campaign for the presidency. Their response also. It's all Russia. Trump and Russia colluded to throw the election back in 2016. Poroshenko and Ukraine had nothing to do with election interference, declared the Adam Schiff acolytes. Yet, listen to this conversation between Poroshenko and Biden 1 month before the U.S. election in 2016.
And another thing, it's just a joke. We released the important documents from the former regent's party. As far as I understand, one of the key advisors of Mr. Trump, so-called Paul Manafort, is resigned today.
Yes. Yeah, I think he's going back to Russia. I don't know.
A bombshell admission. To all this, Poroshenko declares spotless innocence and that the tapes are fake. Does the criminal ever plead guilty right away? I have not heard Poroshenko say anything about his willingness to take these tapes to be verified or assessed. There's a plethora of different ways today to assess or verify a recording. Why won't he have them verified if he wants to clear his name? Indeed, Poroshenko today, as a member of parliament, paints himself to the press the political martyr, the victim. Yet, during his presidency, he was not exactly a friend to the free press. Under Poroshenko's rule, there was not one, but several journalists who were murdered. During a press conference about this, I asked the journalists there in the room, and I said, how many of you would be prepared to stand out and speak out if you had this information? When the case involves billions and billions in corruption, when the case is about President Poroshenko, the answer is not many. In 2015, right in the middle of these negotiations with Joe Biden, Poroshenko issued a sweeping decree banning 41 international journalists, including 3 from the BBC, a move the Committee to Protect Journalists and the international community decried as harmful to democracy and the increasingly hopeless fight against corruption. Biden, supposedly the champion of anti-corruption in Ukraine, did not seem to mind that Poroshenko was banning journalists who were getting too close to their plans. But such details are terribly inconvenient and are to be ignored, especially by Team Biden, who has the most to hide. Don't go anywhere. When we return, millions of missing bribe money and a shocking conversation after Trump's victory. We'll be right back. In 2014, Joe Biden's son, Hunter, joins Burisma, a company renowned for its corruption scandals. In 2015, Hunter Biden is listed by Latvia as being a suspect of money laundering through Ukraine. Ukrainian Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin starts seizing Burisma assets and getting too close to Hunter Biden's activities. By spring of 2016, Joe Biden succeeds in forcing Poroshenko to remove Viktor Shokin and replace him with a man who has zero legal experience. A man he hopes will look the other way on Hunter's Ukrainian cash cow. This victory is short-lived for the Bidens. November rolled in and Donald Trump defied all polls to claim a decisive victory against Hillary Clinton. Biden goes into overdrive to clean up loose ends. November 16, 2016, 2 weeks after Donald Trump's victory, Joe Biden is on the phone with Poroshenko, his voice tenser now than before.
This is getting very, very close. What I don't want to have happen, I don't want Trump to get in a position where he thinks he's about to buy onto a policy where the financial system is going to collapse and he's going to be looked to pour more money into Ukraine. That's how he'll think about it before he gets sophisticated enough to know the detail.
In other words, Biden does not want Ukraine asking for more money from Trump. Doing so would cause Trump to look into the details.
So anything you can do to push the Privat Bank to closure so that the IMF loan comes forward, I would respectfully suggest is critically important to your economic as well as physical security.
Critically important for economic and physical well-being. Biden goes mafia? There is more to this story. On the U.S. side, media looks the other way. Joe Biden has slouched onward despite his Ukraine scandals with the help of a compliant media. Most recently, media rushed to push headlines of innocence when it came to the troubled Hunter Biden. On the surface, this is a damning headline. Ruslan Ryabushavka was considered 100% my guy by the new anti-corruption Ukrainian President Zelensky. And considering Ryabushavka was to specifically tackle the Burisma-Biden cases and is now saying Hunter Biden is innocent, case closed, right? Ukrainian diplomat Andrei Teloshenko says, not so fast. Ryabushavka is no longer Prosecutor General.
First of all, we have to understand who's Ryabushavka. Ryabushavka is a person coming from the Antag society. So basically, this is a person from a left-wing organization being funded and still is today after he is not ousted as the Prosecutor General. The Parliament voted to fire him because he didn't do a good job being the Prosecutor General. He didn't put the Biden case into the works. He didn't do the Poroshenko case into the works. So basically, the Parliament voted to fire him. And now, months after being fired, he's talking about how the case is relevant or not relevant to Hunter Biden or Biden himself. He is manipulating and doing it by getting paid from Soros, by getting politically supported by Soros, and this is nobody's talking about this issue with the mass media today.
Teloshenko adds, if there was nothing to the Biden-Burisma cases, why didn't Ryabushavka speak out while he was Prosecutor General?
So basically, he's now a private citizen talking about all these claims. What if this was real claims, real stuff to talk about, or real cases that he's talking about, he would have talked about them while he was Prosecutor General of Ukraine.
It turns out the Prosecutor General filed an official report in 2019 detailing how Burisma tried to bribe the Prosecutor General's office with $50 million to close the case and make the Burisma investigation go away. As soon as Ryabushavka took office as Prosecutor General, the episode involving $50 million conveniently disappeared. Once Ryabushavka left his post, he went to work for a George Soros-funded nonprofit in Kiev. Conveniently for the Bidens and the Democrat Party, Ryabushavka told the press the Burisma case no longer existed. In early June of 2020, $6 million in cash was uncovered by Ukrainian authorities as part of the massive bribe scheme to shut down investigations into Burisma. The Bidens were quickly dismissed as suspects, but according to prosecutors, the question remains, what happened to the other $44 million? Prosecutor Konstantin Kulik confirms, as of October 2019, the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office signed off on a document that listed the Bidens and Devon Archer's Rosemont Seneca company as implicated in the $36 million Burisma case. This document simply ceased to exist, along with the $44 million in additional bribe money reportedly waved about back in 2019. $44 million can go a long way in a place like Ukraine. As Western headlines continue to push the pure innocence of Hunter and Joe Biden in the Ukraine saga, few bother to mention details that clearly compromise their perfect pictures. With over 10 hours of Biden-Poroshenko recordings, OAN can only broadcast what can be verified. What we have shown you to this point is what we have verified. What you have heard is merely the surface, though, a mere snapshot of a much bigger picture. While media continue to try and run cover for the Bidens, attacking the messengers in an effort to deflect from the message, this scandal is too big. The stakes are too high to stop until justice is served. And while it is easy to fend off from the likes of hit pieces by The Atlantic, The Washington Post, and other liberal rags, the screeching media is of fractional concern in light of the greater powers intent on smothering this story. Derkach says, back in Ukraine, the U.S. Embassy is still run by the Democrat Party. And even more alarming is their reaction to the release of these recordings. The acting ambassador, Christina Kvien, visited Zelensky's office, as well as the law enforcement agencies, Ministry of Interior, the prosecutor's office, and she said she would like them not to investigate these recordings. If Derkach's information here is correct, this appears to be a member of the State Department interfering with the internal affairs of a foreign country in order to protect the Bidens.
They tell me she also had some sort of document she claimed was signed somewhere by the U.S. State Department. When some of the managers from law enforcement asked her if she could share that document, she said no, she couldn't share it, that they could only read the text in her hand.
OAN reached out to the U.S. Embassy in Kiev for the acting ambassador's comment. As of this broadcast, the acting ambassador has not responded. This is an ongoing investigation, so stay tuned for the next edition of the Biden bribe tapes. Tune in every Saturday and Sunday for new editions of OAN Investigates from your team here at One America News. I'm Chanel Rion. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.